I'm so excited to introduce Reggie Jackson, the co-founder and lead trainer of Nurturing Diversity. He is a nationally recognized independent scholar, speaker, researcher, writer, and consultant to the media on race relations. Reggie helps institutions and individuals understand how our country's racial hierarchy developed historically, its impact on our lives today, and how we can realize America's promise for all its citizens. So with that, I would love to invite Reggie to share a presentation with us, followed by our small group discussions with Zeidler Group. Thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here with you all this evening. I'm excited about the topic. Give me just a second to share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen now. And I know the first question that popped into your mind is, why is there a freight train on the screen? What does a freight train have to do with gentrification? Well, when people ask me about gentrification, I always say the same thing. It's like a slow moving freight train. It's coming, you know it's coming, but there's not a lot you can do to slow it down or stop it. And so what I want to do is share with you kind of my views on gentrification, talk about what's happening with gentrification here in the city of Milwaukee in certain neighborhoods. And I'm going to start by sharing with you the definition that City of Milwaukee Department of City Development has designed to kind of talk to us about gentrification. So this is their definition: gentrification. Market-driven racial and socioeconomic reconfiguration of urban communities that have suffered from a history of disinvestment. And I just want to let you all know, one of the words that I really dislike is gentrification. It's a really pretty word, but for a very ugly thing, because gentrification tends to not be nearly as pretty in the long term as it is at the beginning. The Department of City Development has done a great deal to talk about gentrification, as well as displacement of residents. And that's a key feature of what happens when gentrification happens. And I will argue this until the day that I'm no longer with you all, that gentrification always is accompanied by displacement. There's no such thing as gentrification without displacement. People have tried to argue with me about this, and I tell people, like, listen, show me an example of a place that gentrified and the people were not displaced, because what generally happens with gentrification is the people who are in those neighborhoods that begin to see gentrification happen, those people are not going to be there 5-10 years later. It's going to be a completely different space. One of my favorite books on the topic is a book called How to Kill a City. And this book is a book written by a young man who grew up in New York, and traveled around the world for his work. But as an adult, he came back and he noticed that his neighborhood, that was a very exceptionally diverse neighborhood, racially and ethnically, when he was a young man, completely changed, and it seemed like it was overnight in his mind. And so what I want to show you is a quick video that talks about gentrification. So here we go.
One reason new people are moving into these neighborhoods is because of their relative affordability. In many U.S. cities, the rental market has gotten increasingly expensive, and even moderate income earners are on the hunt for lower housing costs. This means that in some places, they are looking in historically disinvested communities, often the same neighborhoods previous generations left behind during the days of white flight. These neighborhoods are often characterized by older historic housing stock that appeals to new residents, and close proximity to city centers, where jobs, restaurants, and art spaces are increasingly locating. Cities are also investing in revitalizing some of these neighborhoods, for example with improved transit access and infrastructure, in part to draw in newcomers. On the ground, gentrification may look like real estate speculation, with investors flipping properties for large profits, as well as high-end development, and landlords looking for higher-paying tenants. Increased investment in neighborhood amenities like transit and parks. Changes in land use, for example, from industrial land to restaurants and storefronts. And changes in the character of the neighborhood, as community-run businesses are replaced by businesses catering to new residents' needs. While increased investment in an area can be positive, gentrification is often associated with displacement, which means that in some of these communities, longtime residents are not able to stay to benefit from new investments in housing, healthy food access, or transit infrastructure. Instead, lower-income families, often families of color, may find themselves facing rent increases, evictions, or other displacement pressures.
So there's a really, really good article written in the Atlantic magazine, and it's an interview with the author of the book I just mentioned, How to Kill a City. And I want to just read this quote to you from the article. While gentrification naturally brings some improvements to a city, including more people and money, it also frequently kills some cultural traditions and diversity. Gentrification dismantles and displaces existing neighborhoods and communities in order to make way for new residents who are mostly whiter and always richer than those who predate them. One of the interesting things about the way gentrification works is that gentrification generally comes in two stages. So you have the early stages of gentrification, which are the ones that appear to be kind of, not problematic. You start to see cities promoting, the arts in those spaces that are gentrifying. Certain types of businesses open up, and a very specific type of people begin to move into those communities. And these are generally not people with a lot of money early on, but it's in most cases, as gentrification continues to grow, you begin to see that first group of gentrifiers actually be displaced themselves. A great example of this from the book is the city of Detroit. My father lives in Detroit, and a number of years ago, my wife and I went to Detroit to to hang out with my father and some of my uncles and my aunt there. And so my wife and I said, we want to kind of see Detroit, see some parts of Detroit. So we drove downtown, and Detroit is like a really weird place, right? They have, and I don't know if they still have it, but they had a tradition in Detroit where for some crazy reason, people would set buildings on fire on a specific day of the year. So we're driving down this really big street going into downtown Detroit, and we're seeing all of these burned up buildings like on both sides of the street as we're approaching downtown. We're like, this is really kind of crazy. So we finally pull over, we park, and we're right next to where the new baseball stadium was being built at that time. The Detroit Tigers baseball stadium was brand spanking new. They just opened it up. And so what we saw was the stadium, and then we saw just a couple blocks away from the stadium, we saw these burned up abandoned buildings. We also saw signs that were all over the place for condos that were being built. And these were like $250,000 condos, which were a block away from the new baseball stadium and a block away from some burned up abandoned buildings. It was just the weirdest thing ever. It was like, something doesn't match here, right? And we were just a few blocks away from where one of the biggest housing projects in Detroit was as well. And so what I understood very clearly on that trip is that those condos will not be occupied by the people in those projects anytime in the near future. Those burned up abandoned buildings will disappear because people will not want to come down to the baseball stadium and enjoy their hot dog and their baseball and then see these ugly buildings. So I knew that in a period of time, all of those things would be gone. So what happens in Detroit later is they not only build the baseball stadium, they build a new stadium for the football team right next to the baseball stadium. And then later in downtown Detroit, they build a brand new hockey stadium as well. So they have three, pretty new sports complexes there in downtown Detroit. And what happens is the gentrification kind of took place over a period of time, and you developed an area in Detroit that's called the 7.2. And what it is 7.2 square miles of downtown Detroit, where all of this development has taken place over the last 20 years or so, right? So what you find is that Detroit has an area that they call the Greater Downtown Detroit. And so years later, a friend of mine who is a GIS mapper, he says, Reggie, have you ever heard of the Greater Downtown Milwaukee area? And I'm like, no, what is it? He says, here, let me show you this map. And this is a map that he showed me from MKU United, Greater Downtown Milwaukee. And I'm like, looking, oh, okay. So I'm like, looking, wait a minute. Wait, downtown is going to extend to Meineke Avenue? It's going to extend to 27th Street? And it's going to extend all the way south to Greenfield Avenue. So that's all going to be the so-called greater downtown area. So I said, wait a minute, there's something seriously wrong with this, because what's happening is people are making plans for that box from Meineke to Greenfield, from the lakefront to 27th Street. They're making plans. They've been making plans for this area. And the people that live in many of those neighborhoods, the people that live in Lindsay Heights, the people who live, in Walker's Point, the people who live in Harambe, they don't have a clue that these things are going on, because what's happening, people have been planning to spend money developing these particular places. And what people don't understand, urban planners, and I've done a lot of work with urban planners and gotten to know kind of their profession quite a bit the last several years. People make plans for stuff 20 years in advance. So all of the stuff that you're seeing downtown Milwaukee, all the development, the billions of dollars that have been spent down, it's not like it just happened. Like people just started planning for that like 2 years ago, 5 years ago. Like, oh yeah, they started deciding they were going to fix up downtown Milwaukee when Giannis, became a superstar. That's not how it works. These plans have been in place for a long period of time. And what happens is development dollars will be spent inside of this box. So I've been telling people that, listen, if you have property in that area, two things are going to happen. Your property values will increase quite dramatically in some places. And that means your property taxes will increase quite dramatically as well. And if you are a person who owns property inside of this box, hold on to it, because you're probably going to get a nice piece of change if you decide to sell it at some point. So these types of gentrifications that you see around the country are oftentimes accompanied by sports and entertainment districts. So the author of the book, How to Kill a City, he talked about the changes in New York and his old neighborhood. He examined the changes in San Francisco, which is now the most expensive city in the United States to live in. I mean, it's just ridiculous how expensive San Francisco is. And San Francisco is so expensive that police officers, firefighters, and teachers who work in San Francisco can't live in San Francisco. So what they've done is they've crossed that Bay Bridge and they've moved to Oaktown, to Oakland, California, which used to be all Black, but it's not all Black anymore. So what you literally done in San Francisco is you've displaced people from San Francisco over to Oakland. And the Black people who were in Oakland have now been displaced, and now they're in Richmond, California. So this movement, when you displace a group of people, you're literally displacing multiple groups of people, because you're displacing the people that are there. Wherever they go, they're displacing somebody, and it's just like a continuing non-ending cycle. So what we've seen in Milwaukee is we've seen some of these neighborhoods, people have been displaced, and where they're going in Milwaukee, I tell people, they've been going to the north and to the west. They've been going to the northwest side of Milwaukee. And these are things that have been planned many, many decades ago. I have a friend of mine I used to work with. His father, many years ago, back in the 60s and 70s, was a part of the planning commission for the city of Milwaukee. And he told his son when he was a teenager, he said, son, they are literally going to start moving poor Black people out of the central city, and they're going to move them north and west. And why did they move them north and west? Because the northwest side of Milwaukee has the greatest concentration of apartment buildings in the city of Milwaukee. So it's very easy to move a large group of people into a place where you have apartment buildings versus a neighborhood that has single family and duplex homes. Because guess what? If you tell the owners of those properties, these big apartment complexes, that they can get, Section 8 housing vouchers and be guaranteed to get their rent, well, they're going to be more amenable to that idea. So what's happening, if you go out the northwest side of Milwaukee, you go out to Brown Deer Road, just drive down Brown Deer Road from 76 all the way out to, say, 91st. And what you'll see is you'll see a great many businesses that no longer exist. I always say this, when a Walmart closes, there's something going on in that neighborhood. When a Target store closes, when all of those businesses on Brown Deer Road started to close, it's because the people that are moving very close to the neighborhood are people who can't afford to keep those businesses in business. So downtown Milwaukee, what we're seeing is this new sports and entertainment district. Same thing happened in Detroit. Same thing happened in Kansas City. Same thing is happening, in Chicago. They're probably going to plan to do something with Soldier Field. They don't like Soldier Field. They're probably going to build a new stadium for the Bears somewhere in Chicago, maybe downtown. I lived in Chicago for a year when I was a kid, and lived on the west side of Chicago, and still have relatives on the west side, south side of Chicago. Some who've moved out to the suburbs in the south of Chicago. And, I spend, prior to COVID, used to spend quite a bit of time going to Chicago, visiting relatives. And one of my cousins who lives on the west side of Chicago in a very, very difficult neighborhood, my wife was afraid to go visit her. She's like, "No, we're gonna go visit that cousin." I'm like, "That's like one of my favorite cousins. Of course we can't go to Chicago without seeing her." And my wife was like, "I don't know if I really." So now when we go over there, well, it's a different neighborhood because a lot of the Black people in that neighborhood are gone. They moved elsewhere. When I went over there the last time was the summer before COVID hit. So summer of 2019 was the last time I visited this particular cousin. And I'm walking down the street and I saw something I'd never seen before. I saw white people living on her block. Now, she's been living over there since the 60s. And I've never seen a white person in all the years I've grown up, never seen a white person in the vicinity of her block other than, maybe the mailman or a police officer driving past, whatever. You never saw any white people. I mean, they wouldn't go anywhere near this neighborhood. But now, not only did she have neighbors that are white, but I'm seeing white people walking down the street, walking their dogs. And then they built this huge fitness center, like at the end of the block down the street from my cousin's house. And I'm like, wait a minute. They are not building this fitness center for those people that are in the neighborhood right now. They're building this fitness center for the people that are going to be there 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years from now. And listen, my cousin may or may not be there, but most of those Black people that were on that block 5 years ago, most of them are gone now. This is what gentrification looks like. And so when we started to build the Fiserv Forum, and listen, I understand people love basketball and they wanted a new arena for the Bucks and all of that. And I don't have a problem with building a new arena. And I've gotten in trouble for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I don't like giving money to billionaires to build sports stadiums. If you're a billionaire and you love to tell people you're a billionaire, use some of your own darn money to build a Fiserv Forum. Why are you getting money from taxpayers to build a stadium when you're a billionaire? Use your own money. I mean, that'd be like me asking my neighbor, I want to build a shed in my backyard. Can you give me some money to build my shed? They look at me like I was crazy. But we constantly do this. And what ends up happening is when you build these stadiums, you are going to displace people in neighborhoods around them, because when the stadium comes, then other things come. These are some things that are coming to downtown Milwaukee near the Fiserv Forum. The Milwaukee Public Museum is building a new building on 6th and McKinley. And this really, really big, expensive, beautiful new museum. I'm glad because, they need a new museum. The building is really old, and so there are issues. But listen, that $100 million they're going to spend on it, the 5 years they're going to spend building it. By the time that new public museum is built, people who are in the neighborhoods north of there are going to look a lot different than what they look like today. You're also going to have a 200-room Marriott Autograph Hotel built near the Fiserv Forum as well. $420 million expansion of the Wisconsin Center, the convention center downtown. So there's like billions of dollars being spent. People do not spend billions of dollars so that they can create a space for poor people. It just doesn't happen. It's never happened anywhere in this country. It's not going to happen in Milwaukee. So what we're going to see is the impact that we're beginning to see. A couple of years ago, I did a presentation for a group of community members who were concerned about their increase in their property taxes. They were concerned that they were being, possibly displaced as their property taxes increase. Many of these are, residents that purchased their homes many years ago, paid them off many years ago, but now their property taxes are killing them. They're increasing very dramatically. Many of these people are retired, they're on a fixed income, and they're having a very difficult time affording these new property taxes. So what I did is I decided to go and look at some homes, because one individual told me that someone in Halyard Park paid over $400,000 for a home there. Now, Halyard Park is a neighborhood that was built in the late 70s, early 80s as a suburb within the city. Because Black people say, listen, if you're not going to welcome us out to the suburbs, to Tulsa and Shorewood and to Hales Corners and all these places, we'll just build a suburb in the city. And so they built a very unique community, very unique homes. And now those homes are close enough to the Fiserv Forum that when people go to Bucks games who don't want to pay the ridiculous parking, they literally will park in the Halyard Park neighborhood where the parking is free. And then they'll walk, the few blocks down the street to the Fiserv Forum. So what's happening is these homes are are seeing an increase in value. And these are just a few homes. I use Zillow to kind of look up homes that have been sold over the last few years. And these are some homes that have been sold in the Halyard Park neighborhood, and $485,000 for one home, well over $300,000 for many others. And what's happening is this individual who told me about a friend who was offered, $500,000 for her house in Halyard Park. These are things that are really very concerning to people that live in that neighborhood. This is an example here of a house, the one I told you about, $485,000. Now, this is a pretty new house built in 2005, $485,000 in the Halyard Park neighborhood on North Bell Phillips, right off of Vine. I mean, I doubt if anyone 10 years ago would have told you that a house on Bell Phillips and Vine, well, it was actually 4th Street and Vine back then. I guarantee if someone had told you back then that there's going to be a house that's going to be almost a $500,000 house on that corner or on that block, they would have laughed at you. But this is where we are. But it's not just impacting that particular neighborhood. If we go to Brewers Hill, we know that Brewers Hill was one of those places that started to gentrify many, many years ago. The shift in the demographics of Brewers Hill has been well documented. Brewers Hill was one of those areas in the early years of Milwaukee that was the most exclusive area to live in. They call it Brewers Hill because the owners of the big breweries actually built homes there. And over the course of time, that neighborhood shifted, and it was pretty much a mostly Black neighborhood. But now you're looking at a neighborhood that is shifting. And I drove around Brewers Hill today. I took a bunch of pictures of these, really beautiful houses. And I noticed there's a very specific style of houses that people are creating. So they're taking old houses that have been there and not building new ones. They're taking these old, big, beautiful homes, and they have a very specific kind of artistic look to them, very kind of bright colors and multiple colors on the house. It's a very, very noticeable thing. But when you look at the price tag that people are paying for these homes, you can recognize that if you are some of those older residents, that your property values are increasing as a result of people being willing to pay, over $400,000, over $500,000 for homes. My father-in-law, has invested in properties for many, many years, and he had a house on Hubbard, literally 2 blocks from where this $530,000 house is. And years ago, 20 years ago, a realtor told him, don't get rid of that property. If you hold on to it, it's going to be worth a lot of money. Well, my father-in-law didn't listen. He sold it way too soon. And now, if he still had that property, he could really make a fortune by selling it. So here's an example of one of those homes. Does this look like a $560,000 house to anybody? I mean, let's be real. Does it look like a house that costs over $500,000? Now, I don't know that people live in a house. It's probably a beautiful house inside. It's nice on the outside, but $560,000? Are you kidding me? I mean, it's unfathomable that a house would cost that much money, but it's because of gentrification. This is what gentrification does. It drives up property values. It drives, people try to make it seem like the market is this kind of organic thing and, market driven, the market dictates. The market doesn't dictate diddly squat. The investment, the development dollars in downtown Milwaukee are dictating people paying this amount of money for this house. It's not as if it's some accident or the market is just, the market. I hate when people talk about the market. The market has forces pushing it. And we don't like to talk about those things. Here is a Harambe neighborhood, you know, and I walked around part of Harambe today, and I looked at a couple of these homes, and what I was amazed at is there's a company. When I was in living in California, when I got out of the Navy, I lived in a city called Torrance, California, which is kind of a suburb of Los Angeles. It's south of Los Angeles. This is geographically, it's the largest suburb of Los Angeles. Very nice place to live. I really enjoyed living in Torrance. So when I saw these houses on Buffalo Street that were sold for $520,000 each, I'm like, wait a minute, that seems very odd that they're $520,000 each, and they were all purchased on the same day. I said, let me do a little further investigation. What I discovered was that the person that bought all of these homes, and believe me, I've looked at them, they're not great looking homes. They will be eventually, but they're not great looking homes right now. That person who purchased those homes lives in Torrance, California. I don't know if you all saw recently in the Journal Sentinel, they had a story about a month ago about the fact that many rental properties in Milwaukee are owned by people who live outside the state of Wisconsin. So this is an example of people investing who have probably never even seen the neighborhood, may not ever see the neighborhood, but they realize that I can spend $520,000 on these homes and I'm going to make some money off of it because they know what's happening. They see the signs. So here's an example. Now, here's another house. Once again, I'm not trying to criticize the house. I'm not trying to say anything bad about the people who live there. First and Meineke, $420,000. In 2018, somebody paid that for this house. I'm like, are you kidding me? I wish my wife and I had bought a home in this neighborhood years ago so we could, well, I don't know. I'm not like the mindset of a flipper. I think you buy a home and you pay for it and you build your family there and you stay there. But people are buying homes as investments. And here's one of those $520,000 houses. This person paid $520,000 for this house in 2020. I was shocked when I saw this. And I drove past this house a couple of days ago just to get a closer look. And I'm like, it's a big house, but over $500,000, you have to be kidding me. So a little background on anti-displacement, because like I said, gentrification is always accompanied by displacement. It's never a case where you don't displace people. If you go to Harlem and everybody think Harlem, oh, this Black neighborhood, New York, it's not Black anymore. Black people have been driven out by gentrification. They've been driven out of Brooklyn. You don't build that big, massive stadium for the Brooklyn Nets basketball team that cost, I don't know, close to $1 billion for that stadium, if not more, if you want to have poor people living around it. So, we understand displacement is part of gentrification. It's too pretty of a word for something that is really, really very ugly. So in 2017, Milwaukee Common Council passed a resolution, and they told the Department of City Development, listen, you have to prepare this anti-displacement plan for neighborhoods surrounding downtown, because they know, as well as many people in the city know, that property values are increasing and people are going to be displaced because they can't afford to stay in those neighborhoods. And one of the things that they said in this resolution, that development should not dismantle and displace existing neighborhoods and communities in order to make room for new residents. Listen, when I read this, I was like, is this like part of a comedy show? Are you kidding me? You honestly wrote that oh, it shouldn't dismantle. It's gonna it's gonna dismantle and displace people. Why would you even put something as ridiculous as that on paper? I mean, I'm embarrassed for the people that wrote this. Like, come on, man. Can you keep it real? Can you keep it 100 like the kids say? So we have to understand that despite what they said it shouldn't, they know as well as you do that it certainly will dismantle and displace people. So let's kind of put some of these things in context as I get near the end of my presentation. So we all know that we're the most segregated metropolitan area in the country. Not the most segregated city, the most segregated metropolitan area We have the smallest percentage of Black people living in suburbs of any major metropolitan city in the country. Less than 10% of Black people in Milwaukee County live outside the city of Milwaukee. 61% of all Black people in the state of Wisconsin live in the city of Milwaukee. We don't have Black people in many suburbs other than a few places like Brown Deer, which is a very diverse place now. You're seeing a growing Black population in places like Glendale. Also in West Milwaukee, growing diversity there with Blacks and Latinos moving into that neighborhood. But then you go to places like Hills Corners, or you go to places like Greendale, or you go to places like, you know, Shorewood, Whitefish Bay. And I'm sure many of you know the nickname for Whitefish Bay is White Folks Bay, and they call it that for a reason. So this history of housing discrimination is what made these communities very white and kept them very white and keeps them very white to this day. The housing discrimination that was part and parcel of policies and practice by the federal, state, and local governments, realtors, bankers, everybody was in cahoots to create discriminatory housing. Nationwide, 44% of Blacks own their homes, but here in Milwaukee, just 27% of Blacks own their homes. There's only one city in the country that has a bigger gap between home ownership rate between Blacks and whites than Milwaukee, and that's Minneapolis, Minnesota. So these decades and decades of discriminatory policies have created these segregated spaces and are creating a space for gentrification to take place. Now, we keep hearing that Wisconsin state law doesn't allow, you know, the government to kind of intervene in these anti-displacement measures. But we're seeing very strong shifts in the demographics near downtown. And as I've said to people, they're not putting money into those communities for the people that are there right now. They're putting money into those communities for the people that they know will be there 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Halyard Park and Harambe property tax increases have led to a lot of people being very concerned about what's going to happen if they're going to be able to stay in their neighborhoods. Low-income renters, more so than homeowners, are being displaced from these communities as the rent goes up. You know, many Black-owned businesses, and I literally went up and down Martin Luther King Drive today to see, you know, the businesses there, and there's still quite a few, a lot actually, Black-owned businesses that are along the stretch there. But as we know, we've seen this in other cities, those businesses will probably struggle to continue to compete, especially if they're leasing property for their building. Those lease payments are going to increase and they're going to be moved out. We've seen a great shift in River West demographics over the last 20 years. I have a friend of mine who purchased a home in River West, and I talked to him last week, and he's very concerned that at some point he's going to be priced out of River West himself, a young white guy that I know. So there was a great article in the Journal Sentinel in 2020, late 2020, that talked about Black residents in Halyard Park and their fear of being displaced. And one of the things that they talked about is that the adjacent Brewers Hill neighborhood experienced gentrification, with longtime residents pushed out as property values skyrocketed due to demand from wealthier buyers who moved in, resulting in higher tax bills for all. Now, Halyard Park residents were the same factors that jumped across King Drive to their neighborhood. And listen, they absolutely should be worried because that's absolutely what's happening. A resident that they interviewed by the name of Claire, she didn't give her last name. She told reporters that in 37 years she's lived in Halyard Park, her taxes have gone from $1,800 a year to over $4,000 a year last year. And since 2014, her assessments have gone up more than $50,000. So one of the entities that stepped in was Milwaukee, or MKE United, and put together this anti-displacement fund. People donated money to this fund to kind of help establish for at least 5 years a fund that people can get money from to you know, make up for the difference in the increases in their property taxes. The woman Claire that I just mentioned received $448 last year, even though her property taxes went up $1,000 last year. So this you know, this anti-displacement fund that was established, people have been asking me, well, you know, they promised that it would be like a 20-year venture, but they're not promising anything beyond the initial 5 years. And listen, I have to be honest with people. And so there's a particular woman that's called me about it. And I tell her, I said, listen, it's not going to last for 20 years. You'll be lucky if it lasts 10 years. I mean, it's been around for a couple of years, but listen, it's not going to last long term because people want those properties and they are going to get those properties because that's what gentrification is. So now listen, these things all sound very depressing. I didn't intend on depressing everybody this evening, but all of you who know me know that one of the things I'm all about is being honest and speaking truth to power. And, listen, I look for patterns. And when I find patterns, I talk to people about the patterns that I see. I'm not trying to chastise anybody that's developers and doing all of these things. Listen, people are in the business of making money. So this is what they do to make money. But I hate the fact that we can spend billions of dollars developing downtown and millions more developing these neighborhoods inside of that box over a period of who knows how many years, and it's not benefiting the people that are living there right now. That really, really makes me very angry because these are people that dedicated their entire lives to becoming homeowners, and now they're retired. They should be enjoying their retirement, but they're sitting around worried, trying to have community meetings, trying to talk to their older persons and other people, Department of City Development, about what can I do to stay in this neighborhood. They built a Black suburb in Milwaukee because they couldn't get to the suburbs. And now that Black suburb in Milwaukee within 10 years will no longer be a Black suburb because the white folks are coming. Thank you. That's all I have for you guys.
Thank you, Reggie. If anyone has questions, please feel free to use the chat. One question for you is, and we're going to get into this in our small group discussions, thinking about, solutions. And have you seen any examples in other cities of different kinds of creative solutions to anti-displacement?
There's in certain cities and in some states, they have the ability to actually put in kind of like a grandfather clause for people who are long-term residents and kind of freeze their property taxes so that they don't increase. You can't do that in Wisconsin, though. Wisconsin state law doesn't allow it. And that is really, of all of the kind of this anti-displacement policies that are out there, that's the only one that I've studied in terms of cities I looked at. That's the only one that's actually been effective, that's actually worked. But so here we are in Wisconsin. We know that this thing would work, but we can't do it. So we have to be even more creative. And that was part of the MK United Anti-Displacement Fund. It's like, well, let's put some money, but these are all private dollars that people are donating, right? And some people, I've had conversations with people about the Anti-Displacement Fund, and they're really happy that the money is there, but they're really disconcerted about how it's being used right now, because the way that they're applying for it, many of the people, you have to be up to date on your property taxes in order to get some of this money. So because property taxes have increased so much, and you're only going to be able to get so much money to help offset that cost, people are behind on their property taxes because, I needed $1,000, but I only got $448. So now how do I find that extra money? And so people are now not going to be eligible for getting funds this year because they're behind on their property taxes. So it's a good idea, but there's some flaws to it. And you're depending on some people who are writing nice checks to continue writing those checks. The reason I started by showing you a freight train is because that's exactly what gentrification is. And people think, oh, well, we can come up with creative solutions. And listen, it's a freight train. If you sit your car on a railroad track and the freight train is coming, their freight train will always win. Gentrifiers in New York, in Boston, in Baltimore, in New Orleans, in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, pick any big city, Chicago, Detroit, they always win. So ultimately, I'm not trying to tell people that you shouldn't fight against it, but I'm telling you, it's like, listen, it's like taking a 3-year-old child and putting him on the Green Bay Packers and telling him you're going to be the new quarterback when Aaron Rodgers leaves. Sorry to depress you. Aaron Rodgers is probably going to go, but a 3-year-old child is not going to be a good quarterback. He's not going to be a football player. But this is literally what it's like. It's like David and Goliath. And I think what we have to do is we have to find a way to convince the people that are the policymakers, this includes our elected officials, that you have to do more than what you're doing. Now, obviously, all of the elected officials in Milwaukee say the same thing. Well, our hands are tied. The state doesn't allow us to do X, Y, and Z. Well, listen, if they're not allowing you to do X, Y, and Z, come up with a plan that's A, B, and C. I tell people, listen, I can't tell you what the solutions are. I can tell you what some of the solutions have been in other cities that have been effective. But in most cities, people have tried to fight this. Neighborhood organizations tried to fight it. Grassroots organizations, they always lose. So I just want people to be realistic in their assessment of what the battle is. You can listen, the train is coming. You see it's coming. It's not going to hit you right now. It may be 5 years from now by the time it finally hits you, but listen, those neighborhoods will be taken over by people with money because money wins in America. Listen, capitalism is about money. You have more money, you have more power, you have more influence. If you want something, you will get it. If you're a billionaire and you want to get hundreds of millions of dollars from taxpayers to build a stadium, you always get it. And unfortunately, what happens is those neighborhoods will shift, and we don't know where those people who are in those neighborhoods will be displaced to. Because think about this, you're a long-term homeowner, you're in your 70s, you paid off your house, you did everything in your career, saved money, did all those things, but now you're on a fixed income, and now you lose your home due to property taxes. Where do you go? You're going to move in with your grandson? You don't want to move in with your grandson. You didn't even like your grandson that much, right? So where are you going to go? This is what I tell people. Listen, if you know people are going to be displaced, particularly these long-term elderly residents, you have to figure out some place where they can go, where they're going to be comfortable. And they're not going to be sitting in a house with their grandson playing a bunch of loud rap music that they don't want to listen. They may want to listen to some of that blues music we were listening to at the beginning of this. They don't want to listen to the latest rap. I can't even name any rappers that are out nowadays. I don't listen to music, but I'm just saying, you have to figure out what to do for these people because they're literally begging for solutions. And they're trying to get their older persons, they're trying to get the Department of City Development to talk to them. And there's one particular woman who I talk to on a regular basis. She says, Reggie, they are not listening. They are avoiding my phone calls. They're doing everything in their power to not answer the questions. And she's like, what can you do? And I'm like, listen, all I can do is just inform people about what's happening. I can tell you that freight train is coming. I can't tell you how to slow it down or stop it, but I can tell you one thing about me. I won't be in front of that freight train when it comes. I will not get hit by that freight train because I understand it's coming. And I want people to understand very clearly that unless you put pressure on the right people to do something about the displacement, because listen, the people are going to be displaced regardless of what people say. They're going to be displaced. We have to figure out a way to make those people comfortable once they are displaced. It's no different than when they built the freeways in Milwaukee and they displaced thousands and thousands of Black people. And they promised, well, we're going to help you find a new place to live. They lied. They never did. They didn't help anybody find a new place to live. They said they would. They said, oh, we'll buy this house from you to build a freeway and we'll give you market value. They didn't. They gave them half of what the house was worth. So this is America. This is how things work. And listen, I hate to be a sourpuss, but I tell people, I'm not an optimist or a pessimist. I'm a realist. And I want to be real with people and let them know you have to work harder if you want to figure out how to fix this problem. I wish I had a magic pill to fix this. If I did, believe me, I'd be very happy to fix this problem. I'd be very happy to tell you all, oh, here's a program from Baltimore, or this program from New Orleans, this program from Montgomery, pick any city, Miami, and this program worked and we could, listen, it's an uphill battle. And that hill is like the size of Mount Everest. So, man, I wish I could be more optimistic.
There are quite a few questions that basically several people have asked essentially, well, how do we stop the freight train? But I think that we all just heard your answer, which is that we can try and come up with a new creative solution. One question is, what would it take to change the law? As far as I understand, it's a state law, and that would be the state legislature, who we don't have a lot of friends with in Madison.
Let me just explain to you why that law will not change. You guys ever heard the story about, Slim? There's a guy named Slim, right? Slim is on vacation, and Slim is not coming back from vacation. Wisconsin has shifted politically to a position, and it's not going to change from in the very near future. The folks that are in Madison that are pushing all of the buttons, they are not going to change that law because it will not benefit the people that keep them in office. So if you're depending on the people in Madison to fix it, the legislature to fix it, I got some property to sell you in the Harambe neighborhood. Because believe me, that's not going to happen. Like I said, I like to keep it real. I want you to be honest and listen. I appreciate the question, but let me just tell you this. If you're trying to fix the issue of gentrification, you can't fix it. What you have to do is you say, okay, people are going to be displaced. We know they are. What can we do to help the people that are going to be displaced? That's what we should be concentrating our efforts on. If we're going to concentrate efforts, brain power and all this stuff on stopping gentrification, go to Harlem and ask them how successful they were in stopping it. Go to Chicago, go to Detroit, go to New Orleans, go to San Francisco, where billionaires can barely afford to live in San Francisco. Go to those places and ask how successful they were in stopping gentrification. What you have to figure out is not how to stop gentrification. What you have to find out is how to help the people that are going to be displaced by it, because it is certainly going to happen. I guarantee it. That's what we should concentrate our efforts on. Not stopping the freight train. Getting people out of the way of the freight train is what we should be concentrating our efforts on. Money
Let me
wins.
ask, when the word gentrification is used, does it refer to the beginning of development in lower income neighborhoods, or does it refer to the displacement that results from those investor plans, or does the word define the cycle as a whole?
Well, it depends on who's defining it. The Department of City Development defines those two separately. So there's a definition for gentrification. There's a separate definition for displacement. In the book, How to Kill a City, he basically defines gentrification as basically, not just the early stages, but as I said, the early stages of gentrification, the first gentrifiers eventually, like in downtown Detroit, in the 7.2 square miles of downtown Detroit, those early gentrifiers that moved into those neighborhoods eventually were pushed out. So this is what happens consistently. So gentrification is really, you kind of have to think of it as like a long-term thing. You see it happening slowly but surely. Have you ever heard somebody say it's like love? You know what it is when you feel it, but you can't really define it, right? That's what gentrification is. You know what it is when you see it, but you can't really like pinpoint exactly what it is. But ultimately, gentrification is a long-term process that comes from policies and practices that people who are city planners make gentrification happen, right? Elected officials make gentrification happen. So it's a kind of a long-term process that are the early stages. You're going to see low-income people have trouble staying in those neighborhoods. But eventually you're going to begin to see people come in and put up new types of businesses. You're going to see yoga studios on MLK Drive eventually. There's none there now, but I guarantee you're going to see a yoga studio on MLK Drive. You already have a bike shop there with bikes that are so expensive that I don't know who's buying those bikes. I walked past there today. So gentrification is just something that takes place slowly but surely, and over a long period of time, you'll be able to see it. I always like to say, use the eyeball test. If you open your eyes, you will see it.
Frida Webb asked, could the case be made for reparations, being from a legacy to former slaves? Can an argument fight the legal fight around that? And then also goes on to say, basically, could we get like professional basketball players to essentially boycott until on this issue? Could we get some help from Bucks players?
Well, let me answer the second part, Frida. Bucks players, listen, they're in the business of making money. They're not in the business of playing basketball. They're in the business of making money. They have these huge salaries. And listen, I wish I was 6'8" instead of 5'7", so I could be making some of that money too. I'm not jealous of these guys, but they are not, listen, rich people that play basketball, they're not really wealthy. they depend on their checks from the NBA. The average NBA player's career lasts 3 to 4 years. So these guys are not going to write a big fat check to help poor people. When was the last time you saw Giannis pull out a big gigantic checkbook and write a big check? He's the highest paid player. The basketball players are not going to do it any more than the baseball players and football players. We shouldn't expect them to. When it comes to reparations, listen, I'm a proponent of reparations, and reparations is not about giving people a check. That's part of it, because every form of reparations has been a check that somebody's got that people say, oh, we don't need to give people a check. Yes, you do. Reparations are due, and I'm waiting on my reparations check. Don't tell me that everybody else can get a check for reparations except Black people in America. But this is what happens. You have to also put policies and practices in place that try to repair the damage that's been done over the last 400 years. That's what reparations is about, repairing the damage. It's not about slavery. Slavery didn't really end in 1865. It extended all the way to the near 1940s. Black people were forced into the convict lease system and sharecropping. You also had 100 years of Jim Crow segregation. You had federal government preventing Black people from becoming homeowners and building generational wealth. So reparations are absolutely due. And this would be part of what reparations would do. You would put people in positions where they wouldn't have to be displaced. That would be a form of reparations. But let me just tell you this. Malcolm X said this a long time ago. You don't go to the head of the foxes and ask them to tell the rest of the foxes to stop eating the chickens, because it's not going to work. And we have people in the United States that are working really hard and pushing for reparations, but you're asking the people that have done the damage to now admit that they've done the damage and repair the damage. The chances of reparations happening in the United States, in my opinion, are slim and none. And Slim is the guy that's on vacation. We could talk about it. It's the HR 40 introduced in 1989, and they finally got it out of committee for the first time this year. So listen, reparations are a pipe dream. And that is something that would certainly help the problem, but reparations are not coming, people. I'm sorry to tell you, it's not coming. The foxes are going to keep eating the chickens because that's what they do.
Reggie, thank you for your perspective, your honesty, for the history, and it gives us a lot of food for thought and good context to continue this conversation in our small groups.